Often sellers are thinking the wrong thing when they meet a potential prospect. And what they're trying to do is figure out how to get to a yes. What I'd encourage them to do is figure out how to get to the truth.
Yeah.
Because you're going to find no's if you're open to hearing them, and that's not a bad thing. It's clarity, right? And then you're also just as likely to find the yeses if you're open to hearing the no's because the pressure's been removed.
Sales are the key to success in all organizations. All the companies I've ever run, the places where we fail or we stop with revenue. Look, revenue solves a lot of problems, right? And a lot of us are sitting there looking at, how do I get prospects? How do I get prospects? How do I get prospects? And they're staring at a blank piece of paper. And Erik and Joe are about to show you how to do that today. So, gentlemen, welcome to the show. We're glad to have you on.
Thanks for having us, Anthony.
So I'm gonna start taking people right down the path. Let's get right to it. Right, when we look at sales organizations and we look at any company, right, small or large, and there's this a little bit of fear, right? I may be an entrepreneur or a painter, and I'm great at my craft, but knocking on doors or asking for sales, for me, I had the gift of working with a guy who. I was young and he drove me, I pounded the phones and he taught me how to get out of myself and really create that. But not everybody has a mentor in the sales world. And my judgment is a lot of people are afraid to take that next step and have no idea where to even start. Right. Is it the yellow pages? Is the phone book? Or is it online? Is it marketing? Is it Facebook? How am I marketing? How am I getting my message out to people? And where do I start?
Yeah, absolutely, Anthony. And it's not uncommon that's the path for most people. When you take just about every other 6-figure, potentially 7-figure, or even 8-figure career, people have to get trained in doing the technical aspects of that business. They have to get certified in doing it. They've got to get advanced degrees in doing it. They've got to get recertified every year to continue doing it. And that's true for just about every profession except for selling. Right. If you want to be in sales, you just kind of end up there more or less. And I think a lot of people had that path, right? It wasn't the plan. It wasn't what they thought they were going to do. They were going to start a company, right? Use that as an example. And then they realize, well, job one is selling, right? So I've got to figure out how to do that at some point, or I don't have a business. The number one reason most companies fail in the first 3 years is not because they don't have a good product. They don't have an audience that wants to buy it. They just can't figure out how to connect the dots there. And that's selling. And they run out of cash, and then that's it.
You think that, I'm going to open my company. I'm going to go out and put my tile out in the front door and people are going to walk in, and then you're sitting there going, you're racking your fingers, racking your brain like, oh my God. And that's nothing more terrifying than knowing I've got bills, I've got payroll, I need cash at the end of this week to pay people.
Absolutely, Anthony. We like to say aggressively waiting for the phone to ring, right? Which is not the best strategy, but sometimes the default, right?
That's right.
So, there's a reason why this happens. And I thought it'd be a good place for us to start by just unpacking that a little bit, maybe sharing with the audience something they might know intuitively, but maybe have never really seen broken down. And so I want to break it down a little bit. And I loved when you opened it up, talking about the breadth of clients that we work with. We're an agnostic sales organization. We're not the go-to construction sales training company. We're not the go-to fill in blank industry training company. We work with everyone, broad and large, agnostic by design. Because when we really break down the core of professional selling, I think, if you take the products and services and you set them over to the side, if they're good, great. If they're not, that's a bigger problem I can't help with. But the rest of that conversation is really just human dynamics. Are we running the dialogue through the human dynamics interaction to get to a level of comfort where we can put a product or service in front of someone, ask them if they want to buy it, and get an honest answer? And so when we kind of break it down to that granular level, I wanted to talk to where some of those problems come from, because they're relatively similar, regardless, again, of industry. Yeah, and you could probably share this with me. I know you've run a number of companies. You've seen salespeople succeed and fail. There's some common challenges everyone's up against. Maybe you could help me out. What are like 2 or 3 maybe that you've heard people talk about? If we could get our prospects to stop doing this, I think we close more business. Anything come to mind, Anthony?
Well, first of all, getting prospects. I mean, I think that most people have this fear of that 300-pound phone, right? Or just where do I start? I mean, my judgment is that most people will understand their craft, but have no training in this regard. And they need a coach like you to come in. And if I were to give anybody support, if they're looking for coaching, start in the sales department, Generate revenue first. Now we get accounting coaching, we get all that other stuff when those problems come up. But the first one is I need to generate revenue. I need a coach to help me through that. And it's not shameful. There's nothing wrong. It's actually building somebody that get me out of my head, get me out of, remember, Fred up my head, stopping me from, I'm overthinking this.
Yeah.
And having a coach like you to bring me through going, all right, Erik, where am I starting? What am I doing now? Where do you want me to start?
Absolutely. And even if we back that up maybe a little bit further, and then we can start unpacking this a little bit, where that even starts from. You think about Sandler, it's a 3-pronged triangle, and we're going to spend some time over this series hitting each of the prongs. So one of them is behavior. That's the stuff you've got complete control over doing. So that would be making that call or not making that call. That's a behavior, right? Whether or not someone picks up doesn't apply because you can't make people pick up, but you could decide to pick up the phone and dial out. So you've got behavior on one side, you've got technique on the other side. It's what do you do if they pick up, right? So, how do you want to run the conversation? What's that supposed to look like? But then up at the top is attitude, and attitude's really framed in belief systems. What do I feel about myself conceptually? What's my attitude towards doing the behavior, using the technique, all that? And it kind of filters down from attitude to the right and the left side. And so, where we get this maybe roadblock and head trash, I think even for attempting to try to sell, most of it's rooted in the problem that's been created through that individual's entire life. And it's not so much them selling, it's them interacting with salespeople, right?
That's right.
And it leaves kind of a dirty taste in your mouth. I think most people don't remember getting tucked into bed at night when they were kids. And, you can picture mom and dad pulling the sheets up close and they whisper dreams of your future in their ear. And they say, Anthony, we really like you to grow up to be a salesperson. Like, I don't know that happened to anyone, right? It said, go to college, get a degree, join a profession that's, a good one, right? And so, again, it creates this conflict that shows up later on. So would it be okay? Maybe we unpack that a little bit?
Absolutely. I think I love when you said head trash, right? That's a great one because I think it starts all with that exact attitude.
Absolutely. And so we take that and kind of bring it back, right? So maybe the early experiences with salespeople, and there's a lot of different examples. And of course, if you're a client of ours, we're spending hundreds, if not thousands of hours together. We've got the time we've got today to unpack this information and see if we can unpack enough of it. But maybe I'll use one example, right? And so some of you will recognize this one, of course, if you remember growing up with a home phone, right? Maybe you're sitting down at the dinner table and the phone rings and it's an unsolicited call, but the person on the other end of the line is, grandma or grandpa. And so a little 5-6-year-old version of you picked it up. No one was expecting the call, but you say hi and they say, hey, buddy, how are you? You say, good. They say, your mom and dad available. You go to hand the phone off and your parents talk to Grammy and Grampy and it's fine, right?
Right, that's right.
And so like 5 minutes later, though, Anthony, the phone rings again and maybe you run over there, you grab it, but this time it's a solicitor. And so it's like the first time you've been interacting with the salesperson. You go through the same similar steps, but when you go to hand the phone to your parents, they kind of intuitively knew something, right? This was different. It was a salesperson. And then they taught that little impressionable 5 or 6-year-old to do different stuff.
That's right.
And so like all the lessons earlier in that day were treat people kindly, treat neighbors like you want to be treated, all that good stuff, be good to people. And then all of a sudden mom and dad said, no, but when you're with salespeople, but you can treat them like garbage. You can flat out lie to them. You can tell them all sorts of stuff. You don't have to treat them the same way. Yeah. And it kind of builds this framework that creates what we call the buyer's system, right?
That's right.
And so you'll see it when you kind of roll into adulthood too. Anthony, ever gone to like a mall and you happen to wander through like a Macy's or a Nordstrom's, you stop, you take a look at like a nice shirt like you're wearing now. Sales associate walks up, they ask you the same dumb question over and over again. What do they say?
Yeah, can I help you?
Yep, and we give the same response over and over again.
No, I'm good. I'm just looking.
Absolutely, right? And it's a completely broken dialogue.
Yeah.
And, I think it's important that we talk about absolute truths. Is it totally true you're just looking, or under the right circumstances, would you maybe buy something?
Absolutely. In fact, I'm just exactly what you talked about.
Yep.
My belief is all that stuff my child comes up in that moment. I don't want to be sold anything, but I do have questions. I just want to, I'm afraid to ask you the question because you're going to get me into some stuck conversation.
Absolutely. And so this, experience at 5 years old shows up at 40 and 50, right?
Sure.
And we do the same thing. So if we start kind of breaking it down, let's say this is this buyer system. So we all kind of learned intuitively how to do it. We should understand what it looks like because if we're selling, we're up against it. So step one in that buyer system, when they realize they're maybe interacting with a salesperson, they start going down the buyer system. The first thing they do is they lie or mislead.
That's right.
So you think about a prospect who realizes they've just become a prospect. The first gut reaction is they're going to lie or mislead in that conversation. Now, not because they're bad people, right? I don't want that to be misinterpreted. Usually it's for one of two reasons. The first is they don't know what they need help with. And
That's
so
right.
it's easier to say, no, thanks, just look, and gets the salesperson to go away, right? But the second one might just be what they were taught from youth, which is don't overshare or it's going to be weaponized against you, right? So it's kind of this defensive mechanism too. And you can think about anyone who's prospecting. What are the early lies that you get? You call someone, you get a well-intentioned outreach, and they say, "No, we're not really interested."
That's
And
right.
right, it's impossible, Anthony, in 2 minutes or 3 minutes to know if someone's interested or not. It can't possibly be true here. But it gets that conversation to wind down, right? Yeah.
My sense is always that they're trying to get me off the phone as fast as possible, right? How fast can I get this? Whoever's calling, they've been true to my day. I'm gonna get them off the phone, no matter what they're selling.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Right. So we got this buyer system. So we unpack it. Maybe let's say there's a couple of stages in there. So the first one is to lie or mislead.
That's
Now,
right.
sometimes though, buyers, especially if you're selling something that might be a little more complicated, it's not just transactional consumer selling. Maybe it's a business to business transaction. And so that prospect recognizes at least that they've got a seller who may have some value. So they want to keep them around a little longer. Right. So they don't really share the absolute truth out of the gates as to what problems they need fixed, but they give some kind of flavor to something they might want help with. And they say to the seller, hey, can you tell me a little bit about how you would fix that? Right? Do you have some ideas? Have you worked with other organizations? What have you done for other people? How much did that cost? Right? So they start asking these questions. Seller, unfortunately, might misinterpret that as gaining value. But really, what they're doing is they're giving something valuable away for free or less than what it's worth. Right? And so I think in every other social setting, if someone takes something for less than an agreed upon purchase price, what do we call that?
Stealing.
Yeah, so that becomes step two in the buying system, right? It's like lie and mislead about real wants and needs. Step two, gather free information or steal if they're able to, right? And so then they'll do that, and then after that winds down, they'll move to the third step. So after they've gathered some free information, stolen free information, however we want to describe that, the third step is they go back to step one, but they do it again in step three. And so we got this thing I call the spectrum of equivocation, which is all the words between yes over here and no over here. Like yes is pretty definitive. We know what that means. No is definitive. We know what that means. But there's all this stuff in between. Hey, looks good. We like what we see.
Yeah.
All, right. All this stuff that is wildly misinterpreted as yes, but yes is yes, Anthony. What's most of the rest of it mean?
No, that's right. That's the soft, get off my phone.
Absolutely. So they'll grab that one. So we'll say step three is lie, but this time it's about what's going to happen next. Right.
That's right.
And so, that becomes step three in this process. And what buyers have learned, and I think this is the fault of the seller, so we should take some ownership there, is they are interacting with people all day long, again, who don't have an accreditation or a certification or a degree to say they could be a salesperson. They're just kind of playing with it, right? And so they might be uncomfortable with straight answers. And so they try to push back against that. Well, if a buyer's had that happen a couple of times, what they've learned is if I lie and make it sound nice here, they'll just go away. And then I don't have to deal with the back and forth. So they're more likely to do it because it's comfortable as a way to, digress from the conversation. And then there's something else, Anthony, that gets a little tricky in there. So for the audience thinking about this, sometimes they like to toggle back to step two. So they might lie or mislead about what they're prepared to do next. And they say, hey, we'll get back to you next week. But then they do, only they're doing it now with a competitive bid sitting in front of them. Right.
Oh.
So then they go back to step two. They want to steal a little more free information, comparing maybe a quote side by side with someone else. Then they move back to step three again. Now, this is good. We're not quite ready yet, but we'll call you again next week. Right. And so they'll kind of like keep that wheel going, if you can picture that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Until they get to stage four. And in stage four, they go into what we call hide mode. So at that point, now it's disengage, right? Radio silent. People who used to respond to emails don't do it anymore. People who responded to voicemails don't do it anymore. So it's kind of this lie and mislead about real wants or needs, steal and gather free information, lie or mislead about what they're prepared to do next, and then ultimately hide or disappear.
And nobody's had any of that happen to them, right?
Yeah, it happens all the time. Here,
Yeah.
I've done it. I've been there. I mean, it's happened to me. I've done it to people. It's almost like a human instinct to are built in my training from my youth. All right, I'm not going to go to that next level. They're going to sell me. I don't want to be sold.
Absolutely. Right. And it's important to remember that people like buying things, but they don't like feeling like they're being sold things.
That's right.
And we'll put roadblocks up when that's the sense that we have as the prospect. So, there's that system maybe on one side, and what it's up against is what we'd call traditional selling, which much like the buyer system is kind of learned through osmosis and observation. Most selling is learned the same way, right? Again, there's no deep accreditation, certification, degree programs in most cases. So people kind of learn by watching others, observing. If they're lucky, they get a good mentor. Often they don't. Even worse, if you get a good mentor sometimes and you go, hey, how did you do what you did there? And the mentor's got a non-transferable skill set. So they look at you and say, I don't know, pay attention, right? So it's even hard to describe what they've learned over 30 years, right?
Right.
So, there's a tendency to adopt the following system. And I think the problem with it too is I'll start with it, Anthony. It's not broken. It actually works. It just doesn't work very well.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it causes for a lot of conflict. So the first step is that sellers have a tendency, without any other formal design for a system or approach, is they try to qualify. Right. And in qualifying, what they're hoping is that they're leading with questions to see whether or not who they're talking to, at least technically, is aligned to being someone who could buy something from them. Right.
That's right.
So, they, in your world, you think about a seller saying things like, when does the project need to be completed? How many square feet are you thinking about the building for? What kind of materials are you using? Right. It's all these qualifying questions to see whether or not we can technically support. Right.
Right. That's right. Right. Yeah. We go. Yeah, exactly. I'm trying to, when I get on that phone call, sometimes I feel like I'm trying to picture where their problems are and what are the solutions I have to get them to that problem.
Yeah. And the challenge there is, as we ask these qualifying questions, we get a lot of false positives, right? So we start to get the sense that while people may be qualified, they're not necessarily conceptually aligned. And so as we get these false positives, we find people are qualified. There's a tendency to move into the second stage, which is to present, right? We might say, or share a solution or some version of options and solutions that meet the qualifying criteria. And so we say, now that we understand what's going on in your world, here are some things you could do with us that could solve and fix those problems. Right. The only challenge is, again, they're technically qualified, but maybe conceptually misaligned. And I think it's always important to think about that and consider. If you've got 100 technically qualified prospects, and Anthony, this is just something I think you've probably observed. Hopefully everyone's observed it. If you've got 100 technically qualified prospects that could buy from you, how many of them on average do you think conceptually will?
Well, yeah, because they may be technically qualified.
Yeah.
But if they're not emotionally into it, is that really the other part that's missing?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a small number. It's maybe 2, 3, 5%.
Yeah. Right.
Something like that. And the problem isn't how do you convert the other 95? It's how do you stop the conversation quickly and comfortably with those 95 so you can go and find more of the 2, 3, and 5 that are actually conceptually aligned, right?
Yeah.
And comfortably being able to disengage. So if we've got, let's say, qualifying, then we attempt to present to them some solutions. And then, there's a natural progression there. After you've presented to a qualified prospect, what's a good seller supposed to try to do, at least? Will they try to close
the deal?
Always be closing, right?
ABC.
ABC, right, Joe? And again, this is the problem with the system. Sometimes what ends up happening when they attempt to close,
they get scared, right? They get scared. They go back to the number 2. They go back to lying again, right?
Yeah.
They get there and they come up with all kinds. Well, I need my Aunt Betty needs to show up here, or whatever it is. I gotta get the founder of the company, or I gotta go, raise Jesus Christ from the dead.
Let me ask it a different way, Anthony. Sometimes what happens there is they actually say yes.
Oh, that's right.
Right? It's like sometimes they say yes, but I love where you jump to, because most of the time, what do?
They get scared.
They get, everything you just mentioned, right? So then the only thing the seller's really left to do is move into their fourth stage, which we call chase, right? And I don't know that it's much different than, say, a dog owner and a dog playing fetch at a park, right? It's kind of an aggressive analogy, but if we demonstrated it real quickly, in chase mode now, the seller gets asked, can you get us a reference study? Right? Sure, I'll run off and grab that, bring it back, drop it at your feet. It's like the dog chasing the tennis ball, coming back to the owner, tail wagging, right? Will you pet me on the head and give me another errand? Can you get us a demo? Right? Runs back off, grabs a tennis ball, brings it back. And so that's kind of what chase mode looks like, Anthony.
Yeah, it feels like to me. Again, anytime I've been asked for a brochure or that whatever you want to call that next little piece of information they're asking for, they got scared and they just need a buffer between the next conversation and the one they're having. And it's kind of the anytime I've heard, can you send me a brochure? That to me just feels like another whole. They got scared and jumped out.
Absolutely, right. And so we go back to this question: where did buyers learn the buyer system? They learned it by watching untrained or poorly trained salespeople, right?
Yeah,
Because when
sure.
when a seller is trying to qualify in an opening of a conversation, it meets very well to the buyer lying and misleading about what's really going on in their world. So they're sending false positives. When the seller attempts to present and share information, the buyer's in steal and gather free information mode. So they'll capture it because they don't have to pay for it. So they'll take it, right? When the seller gets into attempt to close phase, the buyer's lying back up again to lying and misleading about what they're prepared to do next. They'll grab something on the spectrum of equivocation and they'll share that with them. And then when the seller's in chase mode, the buyer's already moving into hide mode. And so it's easier now than it was even 3 years ago pre-COVID. Hiding is simple today, right?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
You just stop using the tech, right? It's easy not to return a phone call. You don't have to even see someone.
And and by the way, most of the time they are really busy, and there's no, one, I'm hiding, and then two, I have no agreement to answer that phone, and all of the above happen in that moment. Right? It's very easy to hide today,
Yep.
and even justify your hiding because of how busy humans are.
Absolutely, Anthony. And so it creates a challenge. And I shared before, the biggest problem with that traditional selling process is it's kind of the natural default in most cases.
Yep.
And maybe to some degree, because often sellers are thinking the wrong thing when they meet a potential prospect. And what they're trying to do is figure out how to get to a yes. What I'd encourage them to do is figure out how to get to the truth. Because you're going to find no's if you're open to hearing them. And that's not a bad thing. It's clarity, right? And then you're also just as likely to find the yeses if you're open to hearing the no's because the pressure's been removed.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So this is kind of this opening to the conversation I thought we'd talk about a little bit. I know I just rambled on there, Anthony. Sorry.
No, I guess so. I have been in each of those, each parts of that, right? Picking up the phone, getting someone on the call. I mean, working hard to get to the person on the phone call, and then pushing too hard and losing the person. No, I'm not interested. The shutdown, or hey, this sounds great. Can you send me a brochure? Or hey, I'm busy right now. Can we set this up for next week sometime? Right? Hey, I'm traveling today. Can you call me when you get back in the office next Tuesday? And then all of a sudden next Tuesday becomes 2 months from now.
Right.
And I'm calling every day. I got them. I had that call like, oh my God, this A brand just said that yes to me. They want to have a meeting. And I walk back in the office. I'm like, I got an A brand to give me a meeting and we're going to have this great thing. And I'm feeling all pumped about there. I got a meeting with the, A brand. And now, it's on the top of my prospect sheet, my call sheet. I'm trying to, and it's on there for 2 months. And I followed up here, no left message here, and there'll be 15 of those on the right end. I put a 15 little right. I'm like, oh my God.
I think a thing to point out too is what you said, Eric, about that this old seller style. It's not that it doesn't work completely, because guys like me, up until I joined you, a year ago, I've been a successful salesperson, but by being a grinder, working 12 hours a day, doing whatever you have to do to get this sale. Always be closing out there every single day. But boy, is it a tough road. And that's why you get burnout and all that other stuff that you really don't even realize why it's happening. So I think what you're saying and having a better way to do that is a very important point to put out.
Yeah. I think to some degree too, Joe, and I'm putting words in your mouth if I get this wrong, but when you first met me, you were thinking, how's that guy so calm all the time?
Yeah,
that's right. That's right. I just had a sales rep do a sales call on me that I thought was really, really interesting. He'd called a couple of times and didn't get through. And, one day he walked in my office and I have a big camera system here. I could see who walks in the front door for my office. And he brought this big giant basket of goodies, like a good self-help book, a personal leadership book, some chocolates for everybody in the office. And it was like this big, like Easter basket type of thing. And he's like, can I meet? I'm like, no. I sent, hey, some guys at the front door to meet you. I got him the no, right? I got him the no, shut him down, right? But all of a sudden, now I've got this, someone brings this thing up, this gift up to my office, and he's definitely got, I don't know, $25-$30 in this thing. I invested in it's like little gift that drops on my desk, and a handwritten note. Hey, this is, Scott. I just want to stop by and introduce myself to you. There's some things we talk about, and I don't know if you're interested. I'd definitely like to talk about it. But like, it took me off of. He really did invest in just coming to meet me.
Yep.
Like, and not sure he had anything to sell me, but he's like, look, you're busy. Here's a couple of things to think about, and maybe you could enjoy my chocolate while you read my note for me. And he just wanted me to read that note, and that got me to read the note. It
Yep.
completely took me off of the here. I feel like he took one boxing glove off, and then he put the other one off because, again, I don't want to get. And I actually got I got on the phone with him, and I got my partner to come get on the phone with him, and he got me for an hour, and
Beautiful.
yeah.
And Anthony, we'll talk about that when we talk about cookbooks in one of these sessions. We'll describe what that looks like. And I think that's one of the keys too. We opened up with this conversation about prospecting, and we mentioned the phone as a reference, but it's important to have a very well-balanced approach to reaching out and interacting with potential clients. Some people are phone people, some people are email people, some people want that face-to-face presence and the stop-in and the time that someone takes to do that. Some people are social media people. LinkedIn is a better way to reach them. As an example, I get prospected all the time, right? I'm running a business. I have over 80,000 unopened emails in my inbox. You think, how effective is email marketing in trying to get a hold of me? Zero. Right?
Yeah.
My voicemail you've been unable to leave a voicemail message on my cell phone for probably the better half of 3 or 4 years. I've got a bunch of recordings for my kids. I don't want to erase them, right? So I'm leaving them up there, right? But there are a couple other ways to get me, right? If you spoke at a conference I went to, I'd be inclined to go up and maybe start a conversation with you. If you happen to stop by my office, actually, on a quick side note, I think the walk-ins, and I know it's not sexy tech, but the walk-ins are huge, what we would call pattern interrupts these days. No one's doing them enough.
Oh, that's right. That art's been lost.
Yep.
Dramatically lost, and it's a gift. Like, you find someone who's not afraid to walk in that door.
Yep.
And, like, all of a sudden you're like, or just one, no one's doing that. Like, I don't hear that email. It used to be, that's what you got all the time.
Yep.
And then that art went away. And now everybody's blowing these emails at you. I mean, I start my day with 300 delete. And I try to unsubscribe them, every once in a month. I'll kind of go through, go unsubscribe, they're machine gunned at me. I can't see any of them, right? They get maybe a second of view through each one of them. So yeah, I'm with you. So yeah, you're right. Now that pattern interrupt you're talking about is a great way to look at it. Yeah. So and audience, we're gonna continue to, as we keep going down this path. We're going to get into each one of those through this whole series. So you're going to want to listen to each one of them. So as Erik kind of dissects the process, right, and you're going to get, selling is not just something as a gift or you're born with. It's a science, right? And what Erik's talking about here is literally the science of doing it. So the foundations of what he's building right now is worthy of listening to, right? To go down the science of it. You're getting the background piece that really is going to create momentum later on. But you got to understand these parts he's talking about right now, the science piece. So let's keep going on that.
Absolutely. So maybe we can talk about that for pattern interrupts. Let's just use that one as a quick example, and we can build on this in some of the future sessions. But you go back to the mall example, right? And I think, again, this is the problem with that traditional version of selling. Like Joe mentioned, you can be successful with it, but it's a grind. There's all sorts of objections, rejections, put-offs, uncertainties, pressure, right? And it can make for a difficult and unhealthy life, right? Never mind business, just personal life. It starts to impact that. So learning how to do things like pattern interrupts out of the gates can make a huge difference. So pattern interrupt is designed to engage the buying conversation without engaging the buyer's system, right? So it's designed to be able to open up that conversation by not engaging that lie, steal, lie, hide framework. So you go back to the mall, just as an example. We can use that one. I know, again, it's a B2C kind of conversation, but let's think of the application. So let's say that seller who kept coming up to Anthony saying, hey, can I help you with anything? And was sick and tired of hearing over and over again, no thanks, just looking, right? And all they want to do is help, but everyone gives them the same objection over and over again. They've got a bad opening. So if we teach them pattern interrupts, what they'd learn to do is they'd walk up to the next consumer they saw stopping in a rack and they'd say, hi, have you been here before?
Yeah, right.
The answer is either going to be yes or no. Now, key there, is it a lie or is it the truth?
Right. You're getting the truth. I mean, that's an easy one to say the truth to.
Absolutely, right? So you're opening the conversation more likely to get the truth. You're not going to get 100% of the time, but you probably will nearly 100% of the time. And so it doesn't start the buyer system. And then you pair that with what we call negative reverse selling. And so maybe that seller now has been taught to say, well, it doesn't matter if it's yes or no. Good to see you. Thanks for coming in, or thanks for coming back. If you want some help, I'll be over here. And then they turn around and they walk away.
That's right.
Right. And so now we go back to that conceptually aligned. If there's 100 people that stop to take a look at that rack, maybe 3 to 5% of them actually want the help and are going to buy. Those are the 3 to 5% that are going to stop that seller and say, hey, you know what? Actually, I've got some questions. They're feeling no pressure now. The buyer feels like they're in control. The salesperson is, because it's predictable, and the buyer system never showed up.
Right. You're taking them back. They know you're there, right? If the free, you haven't attacked them, so you're not one of those attackers,
Yep.
right? And if I have a question, I feel more open to going, hey, do you have this in my size? Or I like that shirt. Do you have another one like that? Or
Yep.
that happens to me all the time. I love that person, right? Hey, I like that shirt. Do they have it in an extra large? I mean, what if it's me? Sorry.
But you think about it in maybe the context of business to business selling, right? And prospecting. So like a non-pattern interrupt version of the opening of that conversation, you're going back to that entrepreneur's trying to figure out, how do I not aggressively wait for the phone to ring, but maybe I do it proactively, right? Try to drive some business. So they're likely to reach out with this natural version of what they intuitively might lead with. And so if I was doing a non-pattern interrupt opening, I might reach out to Anthony, and you pick up and you say hi, and I say, hey, Anthony, it's Erik Meier. I'm calling from Sandler Training. And I did a little research on your organization. I was hoping to get a couple of minutes of your time to see whether or not there was something we might work on together. And I might have good tone. It's honest, but what's it going to kick in, Anthony?
Right. My buyers, exactly right. My buyers,
buyer system, right?
System. Exactly right. Exactly right.
So the pattern interrupt, just as a quick example, and there's a million of them, but you might do something like this. You pick up, you say, hi, this is Anthony. And I go, hey, Anthony, it's Erik Meier.
Hey, Erik. Right.
And I go pause silent, let you respond like that. And you predictably say that, hey, Erik, hi, some version of that. You lean back in. And I go, Anthony, my name ring a bell by any chance?
No, Erik. No, I haven't heard you before.
Not a problem. Wasn't sure that it would. Right. And this opening right there is a pattern interrupt.
Yeah, you go. Right.
Right. I mean, we're having a conversation. You're leaning into it. You're not leaning out of it. I'm not getting answers that are false. I'm getting honest answers. And, you got to pair that with the rest of the dialogue. The sale is not consummated there. But the key is, are we leading into that conversation by engaging, not on purpose, but just intuitively engaging the buyer system? Because if you do that, you got to fight it the whole time. Right. Yeah. Or do you know how to lead in with not engaging it and keep it from engaging? That's a very different conversation, start to finish.
No, and that's it. I'm always looking for, when I'm doing a sales call, I feel like I'm always trying to get, I try to put myself in that person's shoes, and I'm trying to get to, I want them to know that I'm going to solve some of the problems they're having. I'm trying to figure out how to communicate that, or if nothing else, that if they let me talk to them, I'm going to give them a couple of gifts on how we do it for big companies, or, I almost invite them to steal my information. Right. I try to engage the buyer's system and say to them, look, if you give me a couple minutes, I could tell you how we build, brands and how we build them so fast. And it's almost like inviting them to go into their system.
Absolutely. We can switch that around a little bit with, how we pair that pattern interrupt maybe to what we call an upfront contract. Right. Yeah. And the upfront contract is going to be some version of, you mind if I take a half minute, share with you why I called, and now we can get agreement and consensus on that, and then we can share the intent and purpose. But if we've done that correctly, and again, we can talk about this, I think, in depth on some of the other sessions that we're going to do, how you pair all that up so that you can keep that buyer system at bay through the course of that conversation. But really for today, I wanted to dig into what that is, because the problems anyone's dealing with right now, and if it doesn't resonate, that's okay. I think that's the purpose of this opening session here, Anthony, is to say, if none of this resonated, find something else to do. Don't tune into the next ones, right? But if it did, tune into the other ones, because we're going to keep going deep dive on them, and we'll make sure that we keep adding some layers to this conversation.
We're getting them into that whole science, the art. It's a combination of art and science. Right. Some stuff like smile when you're on the phone, all the the things that you have an upbeat attitude, sound like you're important, all that kind of artistic stuff. match it with the science that you guys do, and
Yep.
start to understand the buyer's practice. And I try to go, once we start to understand that, it makes picking up that phone a lot lighter.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, if we can pull that science piece in, now we've got something to coach to measure against, to use as a framework for replication. And maybe that's another big challenge that we can talk about is that growing entrepreneurs are going to deal with this. It's a very common frustration. Often if they did get successfully through the first couple of years, they had to learn how to sell to a large degree in the way that we're talking about, because they couldn't take on bad clients. They couldn't take on everyone. They started to learn how to intuitively say no, because over time, if you say yes to everything, you're going to get in trouble. So they kind of learn how to adopt the Sandler process in the way that we look at it, but it doesn't become a transferable skill set. They
That's right.
learn it, but they don't know how to take it and turn it into science. Right. And
Well,
so they watch.
let me back up just for a second. 'Cause I
Yeah.
think something you said there was so key. Look, I remember being young and starting my first companies and not knowing how to say no. In fact, I was so desperate at the time to make payroll and do stuff. Oftentimes I said yes to stuff that dramatically impacted. If I could give a new company, a new entrepreneur, the gift of your training, in
Yep.
that understanding how to sell my product so I don't have to take the crap that ultimately clogs up my system, that I don't make any money on.
Yep.
Now, the problem is, at the time I was young, I didn't even understand my business well enough, right? So a lot of times I didn't know that, right? I just saw, hey, I want to make money on this. I could do that, right? I would just jump on it and grab it.
Yeah.
And then I didn't start to understand some of the, that's not very fruitful work. I remember when I first started, I was building out for franchisees. They were easy sells. Right? I could call a franchisee and say, hey, I want to do your build out for you. And the guy worked for IBM or he was an accountant. Now he's opening a franchise and he just needed someone to help us. And then I didn't realize that the problem with the franchisees were they have more time than money. Right. And they were on my ass. It was a really difficult way to make money with them. Every decision logic you make was just, so painful with them, that, their logic was about, ripping apart everything to the nth degree that became, super. I couldn't really, do what I was great at, which is release that and really give them the opportunity for me to manage stuff for them. They essentially wanted to get manage it, and they wanted me to teach them how to do it. Right.
Yeah.
And that
Absolutely.
I didn't realize that. All right, I should probably stop. I didn't realize that until you went through that a few times. So some of that you learn. I mean, I think it's a natural part of you. You start to learn, and you can apply that to your future sales calls. Like, maybe I don't want to do that. Maybe I want to do more corporations that understand how to the build process. They're really looking for an expert to deliver. They have more money than time, and that became a gift of knowing how to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that challenge, right? If you get through those stages, is then you get into growth phase and you learn how to say no so that you can say yes to the right stuff. But then you start bringing a team on, right? So this owner now starts bringing a team on that either is going to go through the same 5, 6, 7 years of struggle learning that, right? Which means, that company's back in the same cycle again because they're bringing bad deals on.
That's right.
Or there's a transferable skill set that meets you in the moment in time where you've learned it. We can bring and onboard people into that kind of culture and frame them with the right opportunity to say no to business that doesn't serve and say yes to business that does, but in a comfortable way. And again, going back to the main purpose of professional selling, it's not to get people to say yes to you. It's to get people to be able to comfortably tell you the truth. And when that becomes the mindset, a lot of what we're talking about becomes more intuitive. It's not out of the gates. I think that's the hardest part learning Sandler, and been doing this for 13 years. It's a pretty common conversation that we'll have. It is a simple process and methodology, Anthony, but it is very contrarian to a large degree. It feels counterintuitive, even though it's in their best interest. So it takes some time to learn it.
Erik, you are a gift to the planet. The work that you do on this, look, entrepreneurs, if you listen to this, how important it is. You're probably like a lot of us who started companies and your revenue's just not working. This series that we're going to do is going to take you through that whole process. Listen, this would be a good time for you guys to, set aside the parts you do know about your business, which is great, and sit back and take the cotton out of your ears and really listen to Erik and his methodology. He's trained hundreds of organizations around this world to create this great process. And now is a great time for you to kick in and really listen to where we're going with this.
But to close this up, Anthony, what I would say for those listeners out there that are questioning whether or not this is for them, if somebody who maybe has some sales experience, what the beautiful thing about Sandler that I learned by selling myself on coming here when I went through this process of getting to know Erik and trying to figure out what he was doing here was, we help you learn how to take people through this process without selling. It's selling without selling. You're helping them make a decision on their own. You're not necessarily selling anything. You're helping them get to a point where they go, okay, what do I need to do to get started? And that's the beautiful process about this.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're looking for. I think all of us are looking for how to get our business out there, because we got a great business. We're working hard on it, and we love doing what we do. I love doing construction. I love our business, and my want is to find great organizations that want people who love doing what they do to get out there. And how can I do that in a way that's, it feels honorable? And I don't want to be one of those sleazy sales guys. I want to be. I really want to par. This guy Scott, who did this great sale with me, I just felt so clean about he really wanted to build a relationship, and at least I'm certain he wanted to sell something, but he was really interested in creating a relationship to see if there was a fit. And that made the rest of it. Look, if I buy from him or not, at least I feel like he came over to my office. He did, and that, Erik, that's what's going to be fun about where we're going with this. So, audience, let's stick around. We're going to continue to unpack the science and art of sales. So, listen to the next series that's coming up next, and we'll attach to this one. So, thanks for Erik and Joe. Thank you for being on the show today. It's been one awesome time. I love when you guys are on the show, either doing sales training or any of the background stuff that we're doing. It's always awesome to have you guys on.